Here kitty kitty kitty. Here kitty kitty kitty. That's it. Come to Danny. There you are. That's better. Hi, my name is Danny and welcome to another Board Game Sanctuary First Play video. If you like puzzles and if you like cats, then today we are going to be looking at this amazing family abstract board game called Calico, which weaves those two elements together, where players are building beautiful quilts, sewing buttons, attracting the attention of different cats to their quilts, all with the aim of scoring the most victory points possible, and also weaving a beautiful piece of fabric that you can share and show off to your friends. Once again, if you are a subscriber or if you're new to the channel, please check out my Patreon page to help Board Game Sanctuary grow. I would absolutely appreciate it. Now, on to my first impressions of this really beautiful looking game. So essentially what is going to happen in a game of Calico is players are going to be grabbing their player board, they're going to be placing their design gold tiles on the little cat faces that are on their quilt, and then they're going to be starting with two different pattern hex tiles in their hand or in their possession, and they're going to be placing one hex tile out onto their quilt on their turn and then drafting their next hex tile and drawing it into their hand at the end of their turn. And progressively their quilt is going to be completely filled up, and when the quilt is filled up, at the end of the game, whoever scores the most points wins. There are so many different ways to score points in Calico. One of the first ways of scoring points is through satisfying a pattern cat objective. And throughout each game, there are going to be 3 cats that are going to be placed out for all players to try and fight for. And each cat has 2 pattern tiles that are associated with it. Some of the cats have a little shape of how the patterns need to be placed out in the quilt, and if players build those shapes, they can take that corresponding cat token and place it out onto their quilt, reminding them at the end of the game that they're going to be scoring points for that particular cat. So there's 3 different levels, and each level is going to have different requirements as to how much effort you need to put in or how many tiles you need to play and cluster together in order to score those points by the end of the game. Another way to score points is to claim colored buttons. Now, for every 3 colored hex tiles that are connected together of the same color, players are going to be able to collect a corresponding colored button token and place it on their quilt. Now, what's really cool about these player boards is that the outside colors and the outside patterns can be used to create those color and pattern groupings. So if you have 3 green hex tiles that are connected together, you get a green button. If you have 3 patterns connecting together that satisfy one of the cat objectives, then you get a cat token. The border of each player's player board is actually going to help them create those cool scoring combos, which I really like, because it means that you've got something to start with at the beginning of the game, something to plan with, and then towards the end of the game, you're trying to see how all those pieces that you have left over are going to fit together. The third and final way of scoring, and this is the most interesting and kind of complex way, is through the design goals. Now, each player will begin at the beginning of the game with 4 design goals. They'll pick 3, and they're going to place 1 on each of the little cat icons on their player board. And basically, the design goals are going to be satisfied by the placement of each hex tile around that design goal. So each design goal is going to have 6 hex tiles going to surround it per game. Now, the design goal itself will specify how those hex tiles need to be, I guess, organized in a way. This one has 3 A's, 2 B, and a C, which means you need to have 3 of the same color, 2 of the same color, and 1 of a different color. Or, same thing with the patterns, 3 of the same pattern, 2 of the same patterns, and 1 of the same pattern surrounding this particular tile. Now, I find these design goal tiles quite fascinating because the placement of them on the board means that some of these tiles are going to be shared. So if you look between these 2 design goal tile placements, this particular hex tile is actually shared between the 2 design goals spots, meaning that this tile, when you place it here, is gonna really impact both of your scoring opportunities for both of those design goal places. And the game is going to keep going where players are going to place a tile, they're going to draft a tile, they're going to pull one out from the bag and place it out in the market row, and this keeps going until all players' boards fill up. And at the end of the game, you're going to add up the number of cat victory points as well as the colored button victory points, and then also the design goal tiles. I forgot to also mention that with the colored buttons, if you get 6 buttons, one of each of the colors, you get this really cool rainbow button, which gives you an extra 3 bonus points at the end of the game. After playing Calico for the first time, all I can say that Calico is an amazingly and very well produced game, all the way down to the thickness of the tiles, the double layered player boards which feel recessed, which means that when players place the little hex tiles in the player boards, they're not going to slide around and they're all going to stay in one place. I can see that this game is going to last the test of time, and this is definitely a really cool family game, especially if you're looking for a Christmas present to give someone. This is highly accessible and the entry point is quite low because the rules are so simple to get your head around, but the complexity of the game is actually deceptively deep. And I really like the fact that this game uses hex-shaped tiles to build the quilt, and I know there's this other game out there that I've got in my collection called Patchwork, which is a 2-player polyomino placement game where you're placing Tetris-style pieces out onto a square board, whereas this one takes hex tiles and transforms that ID in a much more different and I think a much more sophisticated way. I like the fact that the hex tiles, each one you place down, you've got 6 options around that tile for future tile placements. And I think having those extra options means that you really have to think carefully about what tile you're placing down now, because that's going to set you up for scoring opportunities later on in the game. And that first hex tile that you place at the very beginning of the game on your first turn is really going to well and truly decide which way your game is going to go. And I think the plethora of options that you have at the beginning of the game just can sometimes overwhelm you. I think I felt a little bit overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, I've got to satisfy those cat objectives. I've also got to satisfy my design goals. And I've also got to make sure that I group the colors so that I can get those buttons. Your mind is almost torn in 3 different ways about how to satisfy those points so that you can set yourself up for a really big score at the end of the game. I also like the choices that this game presents. You've got that restrictive nature in terms of there are only 3 tiles face up in the market row, and you've got 2 tiles in your hand, and at the end of each turn you're going to be drafting from the 3 tiles that are out in front of all the players. If another player sees that you need a particular color, they're probably going to take that color from you, or if there's a pattern that you need to complete a line of 4 of the same pattern, then the other player can easily nab that off you and put it on their quilt. So there is that player-to-player interaction, which I really like. That drafting element also restricts the amount of choices of tiles that you get to choose from. So if you really want to satisfy a particular design goal, you really need to plan early on. You need to see what are the color combos out there, what are the pattern combos, how are the tiles being placed on your board, and how you can translate those into several turns in order to satisfy those objectives. What I like about this game is that there is a huge sense of progression. At the beginning of the game, you're going to have a plethora of options to choose from, and as you fill up your player board, you're going to see that your options are going to really narrow down, and the choices that you're going to make from the midway point of the game to the end of the game are going to be super tough, because you've got to really make optimal decisions so that every tile that you place down is going to net you some points in a certain way. And if it's not going to net you some points, it's going to set you up to net you points by the time you fill up your entire board. I like that kind of funneling effect where there's this big space at the top, and as you get towards the end of the game, the choices become narrower and narrower and tougher and tougher. It just has that beautiful curve to the game, meaning that the game does feel like it gets more and more tense as you play and as you fill up your puzzle. This game comes with a 10 scenario campaign that is spread throughout this really colorful rulebook, and for each campaign there are a set of objectives and setup options, and by completing each of those you progress to more difficult and more challenging scenarios throughout the book. So even if you don't have someone to play with, I love the fact that this game has gone the extra step and tried to make the game replayable by giving you things to vie for, things to try and achieve even in your multiplayer games, but also in the solo variant to be able to complete different scenarios as if you're kind of playing like a little app game, which is really, really cool. And also we get to see all of the cats that inspired this very beautiful game. There are a few points to consider if you think about getting Calico, and on my first play I found that after I set up the game, it was actually quite visually hard to distinguish between some of the patterns that appeared on the little hex tiles. A couple of the floral patterns look really similar, and when you add that element of color to it, it actually takes you a little bit of time to get your head around which pattern is which and which color is which. Now it sounds really silly, but actually when you place all the tiles together, you really start to see how some of them kind of look like the other, and it took me at least 5 minutes to kind of separate the different patterns, work out which of the 6 patterns there were, and make sure that whichever tile I placed, I knew which pattern I was actually vying for, especially at the beginning of my first game, because the first few tiles that you set down are really going to set out or set you up for the rest of the game. But now that I've played my first game, I think that I'm really familiar with the patterns now, so it's not going to be much of a hurdle in my follow-up games, but that's just something to think about. Also, this game has a little sense of analysis paralysis where you're presented with so many different options and you're going through your mind which is the best position to place this tile in, how are you going to place the tile down, which pattern objective are you going for, which color objective are you going for. If I place the tile here, is that going to satisfy that objective over there but also satisfy this objective over here? You've got like 1,000 different questions going through your head, and that's just simply putting a tile down on your board. And I can see how for some people that's going to take them a long time to think through every avenue, because this game is all about optimization, and if you can get that tile in the right spot and see that on the marker row, if you nab that next tile on the marker row and use it on your next turn to score you some points, then people are going to want to think through every single avenue and every single choice that is presented to them. So in considering my final thoughts, Calico is a beautiful game that I'm so glad that I've been able to get my hands on. Now, if you really love Board Game Sanctuary and you really love the videos that I make, I could well and truly use your support. I make these videos for free. I buy all my equipment, I buy all the games, I produce all the videos on my own, and if you really want this channel and help me to make this channel grow and share the love and the hobby of board gaming, then please check out my Patreon page and please consider supporting me on Patreon. I would well and truly appreciate it. Also, if you really like my videos, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Otherwise, I'll see you next time for another Board Game Sanctuary video on the other side. Game on! See you later!